Hello, everyone. We hope you enjoyed tonight's screening of Razing Liberty Square, the latest film in MPT's Indie Lens pop-up season, which features 5 hard-hitting documentaries from PBS's Independent Lens. You can learn more about this series on our website. We'll put a quick link in the chat for you to access. For tonight, I am honored to introduce the moderator for our discussion, Vince Leggett, the founder and president of the Blacks of the Chesapeake Foundation. Vince, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Hannah, and thanks, Maryland Public TV. I mean, I just saw 200 years of history packed in a 1-hour documentary, and it was a roller coaster ride for me. Just the visuals and the experiences and the various voices. Just a little bit about myself. I'm a former housing director, the CEO of the Anne Arundel County, and this is a county near BWI Airport, south of Baltimore. And I was counting on my fingers. It was 37 years ago. I was a CEO of a housing authority. And 9 years ago, I was the CEO of the Annapolis Housing Authority. And this is where the State General Assembly is, the legislature, the U.S. Navy Academy. And so I've kind of seen the public housing and the Section 8 and the housing choice and mixed finance and just all the iterations of housing during that nearly 40-year span. But what I'm equally excited about is we have an all-star lineup tonight that are serving as a panel that's going to share their lived experience as well as their work experience. We have national housing leaders, local elected officials. We have Laurie Brenner, who is with a national housing organization, and she'll share about her lived experience as well as professional. We have Councilman Mark Conway, who is a Baltimore City councilman, with us on the panel, and he's the executive vice president of the Chesapeake Conservancy. We also have with us Dr. Melanie, and she'll tell you more about herself, but I was very interested with her that she actually is with a community development land trust, because I know, and she'll tell us more about the South Baltimore Community Development Land Trust, and academic as well as a practitioner. And we'll hear from our panel persons. And I know one area that really struck me was just looking at space and place. And I heard urban renewal and urban removal, but also this whole concept of climate justice. I know a lot of the spaces that I work in, and we hear about climate change. In many of the neighborhoods I work in, I have to kind of combine climate justice and environmental justice, because many of the streets that I work in and communities, people understand environmental justice. If you're poor, black, brown, living on the water's edge, down in the hollow, down in the bottom, down in the cut, out on the neck, low bottom land, high reeds and high mosquitoes, and you couldn't grow tobacco in it 100 years ago. Poorer people were on the water's edge and more resource people were on the high ground. But now what this story is telling us is resource people have experienced water's edge, and some are looking for alternatives. And when they just talk about Liberty City and Liberty Square, the high ground, and I Googled it, and that's 12 feet above sea level. So I guess high ground is relative, and my panelists will help us drill down and just talk about what is really high ground. And so I'm going to just start out with Mrs. Brenner, Miss Laurie, who's with a national housing organization, to kick us off. Then I'll segue over to Dr. Melanie, and then batting cleanup will be my councilman, Mark Conway. So let's dive in and chop it up and just see where we end up at.
Sure, thanks, Vince. So I am Lori Benner, Associate Vice President of Housing Community Development with the National Fair Housing Alliance. We are a civil rights nonprofit, and our portfolio of work centers around creating more equity in the housing and financial systems. And my particular work centers around helping to close the racial homeownership and wealth gaps. Now, at NAFA, we look at housing discrimination through the civil rights lens because your home is the center point for your access or your lack of access to everything you need to live a healthy and economically prosperous life. And that extends to education and transportation and healthy foods and medical care and fitness amenities, and all of the things that people need in their lives. Now, unfortunately, the way that the housing system has worked in this country, I'll just drop a little context of housing history for us. It hasn't always been fair and equitable, quite the opposite. In the late 1930s, the federal government created a system wherein they decided where they would and would not lend. So they sent real estate professionals, real estate agents, appraisers, mortgage lenders into communities. And they did this in cities all across the US to see who was living in the different areas. Now, if they determined that there were any, by their terms, Negroes, immigrants, or low class whites, those were coded on the map in red. And those were hazardous areas not to be lent in. So that's where we get the term redlining. So these red line maps determined where they would and would not lend. And that's just one example of literally hundreds of laws over decades and centuries that were designed to segregate, discriminate, and deny opportunity to people of color. Now, flash forward to 1968 when the Fair Housing Act, much of that was made illegal, but unfortunately, those past laws and policies have very, very real, lasting impacts today.
Well, thank you for that historical perspective, and we'll be circling back. Now, Dr. Melanie Thomas, just kind of give us a little thumbnail on where you've been, where you're going, what's the view from your window?
Awesome. Thank you very much for the great introduction and the opportunity to be on this panel with such dynamic people. I'm Dr. Melanie Thomas, Executive Director of the South Baltimore Community Land Trust. And we're a land trust formed by decades of youth organizing around climate issues, actually, and the environment. And one of the ways, or we look at the land trust as a tool to be able to have community ownership and have a say in what goes on in community. So as a resident here, the past 18 years in Curtis Bay, we are helping decide the trajectory of our future as residents, as students, as leaders, where we are envisioning a future where homes are healthy and we have an environment that is healthy as well. Some of the things that we've seen, and one of the things that we've researched through living here and discovered is our community, we're overburdened by toxic polluting industries. And those industries and the pollutions that they emit contribute to climate change and different other factors that contribute to poor health, right? So it's not just looking at where people live or people that are closer to the water. They're environmental factors, our air, what we're breathing in, what we're being exposed to, that is giving us and determining our trajectory. Watching the documentary, it just really had me so similar, right? Like there's nothing new under the sun. And what I saw some of Baltimore. And I saw the history repeating itself, where communities, Baltimore made redlining famous. Let's make that clear. Baltimore set the trend for redlining, and that's a model that other cities and states followed. And with that too, Baltimore can reverse that, right? And the CLT model, the Community Land Trust model, is one of those tools that can be used to help reverse this issue and make homes permanently affordable. A lot of times we hear affordable housing, and that's a bad word for some people, right? So we need to take away that negative connotation and really shift to permanent affordability. And that is what the community land trust model strives to create and provide for community members. So our goal is to boost home ownership. One of the ladies in the documentary, she said, you know what, her greatest power is ownership, owning homes right where they live. And it's important because, as she said, when you have ownership, you have access. And having access is important because then you determine whether you go or not. It's not going to be somebody telling you that you have a choice to make or you have to choose. You got 2 weeks to decide. All right, take this voucher or not. Where are you going to go? So that it puts the ownership and the responsibility back in the people's hands, just as so many of the people in the documentary at the town halls, they're like, no, y'all deciding for us. But what we're doing is the opposite, where we're starting with community, talking with residents, seeing what residents have endured and what they've had to been faced with, and giving them an opportunity to be part of a positive solution, where we're really looking at climate justice, environmental justice, and housing justice. Because if we really talk about it and get into it, some of the private landlords, they wouldn't even live in the homes that they rent. Right? Let's be real. that doesn't, some people, they don't have those standards or feel that they have to provide quality to someone just because they're getting a voucher. So our motto is development without displacement, and providing for people in community, no matter status or income, no matter where you live, whatever. Everybody deserves decent and affordable, permanently affordable housing.
Thank you. And Honorable Mark Conway, by being an elected official, a practitioner, a statistician, and in addition to sitting up 12 o'clock at night at a city council hearing in Baltimore, but also with your work as executive vice president with the Chesapeake Conservancy, that's a 64,000-mile watershed from Cooperstown, New York, down to Hampton Roads, Virginia, the biggest estuary in North America, the Chesapeake Bay, and you have your hand in that. And what I'll also say is my background is urban planning, graduate from Morgan University, and 80% of all elected officials got their start on a land use issue. They stopped the bridge, they stopped the road, they built the school, they closed the school. I hope before our time is over, we can hear what was your segue from your education background into being an elected official.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Vince. It's an honor to be on this panel and, familiar with everybody here. So as Vince alluded to, I also, I'll start with the Chesapeake Conservancy. I'm the executive vice president of external affairs. And what we do is we help to conserve, restore, and help others explore the Chesapeake Bay. And with that, we use data and best practices to inform approaches to improve the Bay. So, have a lot of familiarity on the environmental side and the environmental justice side, and thinking about how to think about those two pieces together. On the other side, I serve as the councilman for the 4th District in North Baltimore. And I take all that environmental insight and I put it into my policy. Very familiar with Dr. Thomas, and we work frequently together on issues in Baltimore City. So always a pleasure to see you, Dr. Thomas. But, really, really thinking about resiliency for the city of Baltimore, because we most certainly have a lot of the same issues that they're talking about in Miami. We have neighborhoods that flood regularly now, unfortunately, because of some of the significant rainstorms that we've seen the past couple of years. Frederick Avenue, is a great example here. We've literally had people moving out of the homes on Frederick Avenue because it's been flooded a number of times. For folks in Maryland, of course, we're all familiar with Ellicott City, but Baltimore is dealing with that on a similar scale regularly. 35th Street in Hillen, another great example of inland flooding that we're dealing with as a result of climate change. And so you tack on that with some of the pollution that we see in underserved and under-resourced and underrepresented communities. This is an issue that, we really, really need to be thoughtful about. I really appreciated that documentary and the perspective that it gave, because I think in thinking about investing in underserved communities, because they most certainly need it. They need it the most. You want resources. You want new housing. You want nice, beautiful buildings. You want something that people can be proud of. And Dr. Thomas talked a little bit about, we want people who are developing buildings that they would also want to live in. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we're not displacing folks and that we're not pushing folks out along the way. And, we'll get into, of course, the documentary, but, it really, set off a light bulb in my head about, when we are dealing with these issues in Baltimore City, making sure that we're being very thoughtful about the needs of residents, not just building new buildings, but also making sure that those communities still keep their sense of community, and that there are resources and things that address the needs of people who are frankly poor and are going to have different needs from the people that they may end up living next to. So really looking forward to jumping into events and, eager to hear what my colleagues have to say.
And just one question, Doc, and I'll go back around. So was there a land use issue that you rode into victory on? Were you a Bob Bukowski that stopped a expressway running through Fells Point? I mean, how did people get to know who was Mark Conway was?
I wish I had that opportunity. I think, I came into this city council seat having the fortunate opportunity of working in city government for a number of years and understanding how, city government makes decisions. I worked in CityStat as the deputy director and for a time the acting director, using data, analytics, and best practices to inform policy decisions in the mayor's office. I think this is really interesting for the documentary. All the things that you heard coming from the developers and folks that represented that project, those were like good things, buzzwords, new apartments and like upscale things and more investment in the community. Those are great. We want that. Those are good things. We don't want to see people moved out of their homes. We don't want to see communities lose their sense of community. When thinking about how we make sure we get investment in communities and we see grocery stores in communities that can't get grocery stores, or see transportation in communities that don't have transportation, or make sure that we're not seeing overwhelming pollution in poor communities, we want to see those things happen, or rather not happen. But we also want to make sure that we keep that sense of community and we don't displace folks, and we give them all the tools they need in order to make sensible decisions about what is the best for their family. To answer your question, Vince, not exactly. That's not exactly how I got into this, but okay. I don't doubt one second that I'll have that opportunity in my tenure.
Yes, well, thank you. And I guess for me, just watching Aaron, I mean, was he the antagonist or was he the protagonist? I mean, that was just one character that kind of went for working with the developers. At the end, he was with a Black development group and lived in the community and was just a lot of focal point. So I'll just kind of go back to Laurie and Melanie, Dr. Melanie and Ms. Laurie Brenner. But what about Aaron? How did he fit into this narrative today? What's your take on Aaron? I'll start with you, Melanie, and then Dr. Thomas, then go over to Ms. Brenner.
Yeah, Aaron was put in a hard place, right? And actually, he chose to be in that place because his intentions and his heart was in the right place. And a lot of times, and I think he said it, I can't remember his exact words in the documentary, but he said, like you're kind of fooled or tricked into believing, you're sold this notion. And oftentimes, and then, this is what he said. He said he was a political ploy. And, a political pawn rather. And so many times, like, it just made me step back too and kind of think like, okay, how do we play into this too, right? Because politics is in everything. And how are we making sure that our values and, everything that we know in our heart of hearts to be very true about the communities we live and grow to love? How do we make sure that we don't cross that line and compromise, right? It's kind of like I envision him as wanting to see the glass as half full. right? Looking at saying, okay, they have good intentions, but knowing when we know historically what happens when private developers come in, those promises, even if they're in a contract, they don't matter. You know, they're given people this false sense of hope. Again, that's why it's important to not have people react to something, but to be part of a process. And Aaron came in, I think, on the back end where, you know, he's like, okay, I'm from here. And yeah, I know what the people want. And I know, you know, this is what I know to be true. His intentions were great and I were good, I think. But I feel that he finally saw exactly through all of the smoke. And it was too late though. Because the community had already been displaced and the many people that he grew up and loved, you know, were sent out to fend for themselves. And really that recipe, that voucher system, sometimes it's a recipe for homelessness. And we're seeing it today with with the pandemic. We saw like how the increase in people not being able to afford to live when the moratorium was lifted, the eviction moratorium, so many people are now not able to get back into public housing because they have an eviction now on their record because they weren't able to maintain the market with no preparation. Imagine someone being on a voucher system, being given or being in public housing, being given a voucher to go into the private market, and then not knowing how to navigate that. If you give somebody, you can give somebody the best, but if you don't give them the tools and the information needed to let them make informed decisions, it's a recipe for disaster. So that's how I view him. He tried. He had a heart, I think, for the people, but it was not a good decision and not a good place to be in.
Thank you, Ms. Brenner.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Aaron was definitely a protagonist. His heart was in the right place, but he kind of got ground down by the system. And I'll say that, you know, all of us work in this community development space. We work in the space of racial equity, and it's hard. It's really, really hard when you're dealing day in and day out with challenges and inequities and disparities and unfairness. And you see it over and over and over again. And particularly those people who are working in it and also may, you know, live in that space themselves. You know, even though I work in the racial equity space, I fully concede that I'm approaching it from a place of privilege as a white woman. And so I start off on a different level than many folks who are in this. But again, it's tough and it's heartbreaking. And so once you start seeing the layers of bureaucracy, and you start dealing with the community, and we have some questions in the chat or some comments from one of the viewers that talk about community organizing and how do you do that and how do you maintain a productive discussion, particularly with folks who feel very impassioned because it's their home, it's where they live, it's where they're raising their family, it's perhaps where they've spent their entire life, their barbershop or their church or their school. Everything is centered, you know, I talked about this earlier, everything is centered around the home and community. And so it's a very heart-wrenching process and a very heart-wrenching subject. And so sometimes these folks have never had a voice, they've never been heard. And so sometimes it's just a matter of letting them speak, you know, just that's all they want. They just want to be heard. They just want someone to listen to them. But yeah, to Ms. Sparrow's point, yes, you do have to have that balance. It is extremely difficult to manage conflict, differing opinions, differing viewpoints. And so, you know, to her point, different ways to effectively facilitate the dialogue can be by having different avenues for that. It can be survey work, it can be small group discussions. So there are multiple ways, and all of those really should be deployed in a good and effective community outreach and public comment process.
Well, Ms. Brenner, thank you for harvesting the chat. Hannah, was it anything else popping up in the chat? I know we wanted to chop it up a little bit among ourselves, but we also want to be stakeholder driven. Were there any themes that have kind of come out? And Mark, I see you have a point of order up. I can tell you a councilman. That always trumps everybody. I had a little lady at my church, one finger up, made to slow it down till I catch up with the scripture. So yes,
yeah, I appreciate that, Vince. One of the thoughts I had as Lori was talking was, it just kind of trying to be a problem solver. As I was listening to the problems discussed throughout the course of the documentary, one of the things I really wish residents had in the course of making that decision was just a lawyer, somebody to review contracts, somebody to advise them on their rights, someone who understood the system and wasn't employed by the developer that was doing the project. I think, sometimes even for myself, I need lawyers to write laws. So sometimes it can be very, very difficult to navigate those pieces. And I think, probably not enough can be said about Valencia, who was the community organizer who decided to stay in her home and fix up her own home. And she's kind of shown as this sort of bright light in her neighborhood. I think there are a lot of people like that exist in any of these neighborhoods that are willing to fight that fight and make sure that people aren't just taking the easiest option in the meantime, which may be a voucher, and foregoing the opportunity for full home down the line. But I think having legal advice, having someone that squarely has the interests of the residents of that public housing place in mind, I think is really, really important.
Thank you. Hannah, is there anything out there that you would like to bring into the conversation, Hannah?
Yeah, I appreciate Laurie did a great job of addressing one of the major questions that was in the chat. We had another question come in for Councilman Conway that they want to hear a little bit more about what the city council could be doing, could be doing more in the fight against the CSX coal piers in Curtis Bay. In the ways that those facilities are affecting the homes in that area.
Yeah, the sort of Curtis Bay CSX facility has been a significant problem in the past couple of years. In fact, we've seen a couple of explosions, of which Dr. Thomas has been a huge advocate from the community side, making sure that those folks are held accountable. And, we on the city council have held a number of hearings about exactly those issues, making sure that, one, as best as possible, they could make it safe from explosions and make sure they're communicating with the community. But ultimately, this is just a really, really unfortunate scenario in which, CSX has been there for a very, very, very long time. And I really wish it was easy to say that we can just, poof, CSX goes away and we can plant a nice forest there or something, but it's just not that simple. And I think as we navigate, broadly the transition of our energy systems broadly for the country toward greener, more sustainable solutions, I think it'll be easier for us to make that change and that decision. There's only so much, honestly, that the city council can do in this scenario. CSX owns the property. They have federal protections on their right to operate on that property that the city council does not control, which is, unfortunate. But what we do and what we continue to do is make sure that as much as possible, they're held accountable to a standard, a high standard for safety and public health considerations on that site. Coal dust, explosions, things like that really have plagued the community for decades now, over half a century at this point. We want to make sure that those things don't go unaddressed, and that honestly, I don't know how to solve it. I've been in office now 3.5 years, and I wish I could tell you I figured it out that quickly. But I think it's something that we continue to pay attention to, and I've been working with my colleagues on the council to make sure that the concerns of the community are heard, that they have a voice and an opportunity to speak in a public forum, and that the folks at CSX are being frankly, grilled on exactly these public safety issues and public health issues for which they probably would not want to live under those circumstances either. So, we're going to continue to do that work and continue to be a resource to the community. Unfortunately, there's no, silver bullet here.
I know another issue I'd like to bring up is, I guess in my 40-year career, it was 2 or 3 years as a lobbyist in the General Assembly. And when those guys and gals are in town, nobody is safe for 90 days. And so in the recent news cycle, they were just talking about vacant housing in Baltimore and trying to address the Baltimore housing issue. And the governor had initiatives and senators and delegates had initiatives. And so again, it just seems like housing, accessible housing, and how do we put people to work? How do we use housing as an asset to do those things to strengthen our communities? Again, anybody on the panel want to kind of weigh into any intersections there or lessons learned in Miami that might could help us in Baltimore around those kind of issues?
If I could add quickly, and I'll because I've been talking a lot, I'll hand off to one of my colleagues. But one of the most important steps that Baltimore's taken in just the last week has been the signing of the inclusionary housing package that would require that all new, larger housing projects, that are 20 units or more would have to have at least 20% of the project go to affordable housing units. And so that is a huge step in the right direction for the city. We had an inclusionary housing policy in the past that only produced, like 30 units over, over multiple decades. And so hopefully, our latest policy will begin to create more affordable housing, mixed income housing in desirable communities so that we're really beginning to meet the needs of the residents of Baltimore.
Ms. Brenner, Dr. Thomas, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in. I think there are several things or several other factors in play. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund is a fund that we helped to create through 2 ballot initiatives. So, and I was part of leading one of those ballot initiatives to get the fund funded. And that is one of the primary sources of funding for community land trust, development of permanently affordable homes for home ownership as well as rentals. So I think that's one tool. The other thing that we're looking at as a way to address community development, there's a coalition that has formed that will be doing another ballot initiative, the With Us For Us coalition. And it's other, groups where they're looking at the pilot agreements, which is payment in lieu of taxes, and looking at how many pilot agreements exist in Baltimore City and how, shifting away or looking at how to deploy some of those resources that are not being collected from these institutions, and then spread to other community groups and CLTs or whatever that are doing actually community development. So like looking at ways we can use where Baltimore's leaving money on the table pretty much, right? And how we can really deploy those two efforts that will help advance community initiatives. There are amazing organizations and, organizers that are doing the work already, right? And funding, we know for development, it takes money. And one of the things that was a bit concerning in the documentary was, how the mother of 7, she reported the house started leaking already, so what that said to me is like, okay, yes, this big developer, I'm sure they got a lot of tax breaks or whatever it is. They got all these incentives to build these homes. Now, were all the other mixed units built to that point where they would be leaking so quickly upon construction? Or was it built with integrity? And that's another thing that I try to keep in mind as we're doing development. Like, how are we building? We're building to make sure that we would want to live there. And then we want to think about the lifetime of that home. The land trust keeps a home affordable through the Affordable Housing Land Trust Agreement. And that home stays affordable for 99 years. So once grant money is given, or awarded rather, earned for us to build those units, it stays with the units and the homeowner. It does not cap or limit how much a homeowner has to, stay within. It's not like the Section 8 where they have to maintain a lower income level. It gives them the opportunity to grow and gain wealth, and pass that home on too. So it's a lot of times the community land trust model, historically, there are over 270 in, across the world. And that model, over 70% of those in community land trust homes were not did not foreclose compared to the traditional market. So because there is that community aspect and that sense of belonging and being part of a collective, that we're able to help or know when a family is not able to make the mortgage and work with them on those different things to prevent foreclosure. So I think looking at different avenues and having different tools to be able to address, access. One, there needs to be more housing. The access is limited right now. The need is far greater than what's available at the moment. But still, these tools that we're doing and what we are providing with the homes that are coming on the market, we're able to keep those permanently affordable in those communities as they begin to beautify and as they say, as they gentrify, right? Having units where they will always be affordable for members that meet specific area median income levels, right? But it doesn't cap them where they have to stay there, but it gives them that in, and then from there they can start to earn and build generational wealth through home ownership. And also stable rentals, because we see the rising rental costs. 1,400 for a 1-bedroom. I think that's what they said in the documentary. Ridiculous, and it's some of those same numbers we're seeing here in Baltimore. So it's definitely we need more tools. One, that have an understanding of community, wanting to not capitalize off of people's situation, but giving them an opportunity and a stepping stone to help better themselves. And that's through empowerment, education, explaining, as Councilman said, like having lawyers and giving them access to resources and tools that they may not know necessarily where to turn. So I think having a full holistic approach to this housing issue and really addressing that is the way to go.
Well, I see that Miss Brenna's there like a tag team wrestling partner ready to get into the fight. So come on in, Miss Brenna.
Well, so what I'm going to say is, and I know we're basically pretty much out of time at this point. So I will, I will offer my final remarks by just bringing it back to the climate equity and environmental justice piece of that. And just share just a couple of quick statistics. And those are that Black individuals are 75% more likely to live in communities that border a plant or a factory. Another study showed that 52% of Black individuals, 32% of Asian, and 21% of Hispanics are more likely to live in heat zones. There are just dozens and hundreds of stories like these. There was a public housing project that was built on a former lead smelt. It took 31 years, 8 federal agencies to have it be declared a Superfund site before they even notified the residents. So the residents there continued to get sick and suffer permanent, health damages. And 40 years later, they finally raised the site and are now remediating it. And so a not so fun fact is that 70% of all Superfund sites are located within 1 mile of federally assisted housing. And so I share those disparities and inequities just to echo the point that, the injustice is much more exponentially more severe in communities of color. So we need to pay much closer attention to those types of issues, when proposing solutions.
Well, thank you. I'm going to make my closing statement before I turn it back over to Hannah and give you all the view from the C-suite. As I indicated that go ahead, Professor Conway.
Sorry, Vince. I wanted quickly, and I'll be very brief with this answer.
Go right ahead.
Questions that I saw pop up in the chat. Someone asked, Martha asked, if there are any requirements for monitoring for the inclusionary housing bill in Baltimore City, and yes, there are. There'll be regular yearly reports for the city, because the city has to provide that tax break for those developers to develop those units. And then I saw two questions from Rachel and Violet, essentially asking, why doesn't the city just require that they create these units? And it's private property law, effectively. As part of the U.S. Constitution, that the government cannot just take your property and do with it as it pleases. We have to compensate you for that. So when a developer develops a property and we say a certain percentage has to be affordable housing, we are essentially taking a portion of that property for the public use, and so we have to compensate them for that. That's why these tax credits are effectively required when you're doing things like that.
Well, thank you. And what my closing statement is, the view from a housing director, a public housing director's lens, because my take on the documentary, that was one of the voices that never came in, because you really, if Liberty Square, Liberty City were traditional public housing, and now they're bringing in developers for mixed finance, because HUD had stopped putting dollars in to keep up traditional public housing. So it drove many of us away from traditional public housing that did have a bundle of rights for tenants that did not get transferred to these mixed finance properties. And so I think a voice, as we explore these issues in Baltimore with mixed finance and affordability, if in fact they were traditional public housing, it's that bundle of rights that really got lost in a lot of these mixed finance situations. And I learned that lessons from the residents of public housing. Even as a CEO, if I had a bad act in one of my neighborhoods and they had to leave, I would have lunch for long-term residents that knew the HUD regs better than I knew them, because they had been trained by legal aid and everybody else, and they were some of the smartest people I'd met. And so I would get some pizza and tell them, come on down to the conference room. We got a few bad apples I'd like to talk about. And so again, we just looking at assets in our community. And for me, informal leaders can be just as important as formal leaders. So that was another takeaway for me. So Ms. Hannah, you're kind of overseeing our time together. So you can tell us where we are and where we aren't, and any closing remarks you have on behalf of MPT or you as our coordinator. Ms. Hannah.
Thank you so much, Vince. Just, want to give our panelists one last opportunity for any final remarks. Dr. Thomas, if you wanted a few moments, you're more than welcome to take the floor now if you'd like.
Yeah, I just put something in the chat, and I was saying one of the other negative connotations with affordable units is that they're time capped, right? So then after that, and typically it's 30 years or so with these LIHTC or whatever they're using to make the unit affordable, and then they go back to market rate, right? So that's why I was saying with the community land trust movement and model, we're keeping homes permanently affordable. And that is one of the things where it's, we have to ensure, or as we're thinking about this issue, are we setting people up for failure or success? And are we giving them tools, or saying, okay, you can afford it right now, but down the line, you're going to be back in the same boat. You're going to have to be looking for another place. And the way that this world is going and the market is going, I don't know where will be affordable for people, because let's be real, not everybody's a top earner. Not everybody has the 6-figure or 7-figure jobs, that are bringing in the capital to be able to afford to live, much less eat. I mean, let's talk about food deserts, and even just the access to healthy food, quality food. You look at communities like um, the one we watched in a documentary. They are by design. They showed how these things historically, they have mapped out how they want communities to function. Communities not having access to grocery stores, or not having a grocery store in their community, not having transportation available to community members, not having local jobs or facilities, for people to have and earn a living wage. I don't even know what a living wage is, but anyway, not having a opportunity for people to earn and truly provide for their family. It's, we can't think like that. It's all by design, and that's why we have to be intentional about the way that we are moving, and the way we're shifting and thinking about all of this. Is this a long term, or is this another band-aid approach? We don't need any more band-aid or cookie cutter approaches. We need true overhaul and upheaval of the systems that have led us to this point where we are today. And thank you, Violet, for posting our
Well said, Dr. Thomas. Well said.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all again. Thank you, Vince, for your moderating in our conversation this evening. And thank you to all of our panelists for your contributions to this very educational and enlightening conversation. Thank you to everyone at home for joining us tonight. We will be sending out a recording of tonight's panel discussion, as well as some links to our partner organizations' websites and additional resources. So don't forget that you can now stream Razing Liberty Square on MPT Passport, and we'll put a little link in the chat to download that app if you haven't already. And we would love to hear your thoughts on tonight's event. So please visit an additional link in the chat, and we'll also put up a QR code on the screen to take an event survey. And there's a little entry into winning a $50 gift card if you take that survey for us. So again, thank you all so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful night.
Good night. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you, everybody. Good night.
Great.